Welcome to the Emerge Collaborative podcast. I'm Falon.
And I'm Rachel.
Together, we share more than 2 decades of experience working with young adults on college campuses.
So on this podcast, we're engaging the questions we hear in our ministry to better equip those who care for the emerging adults in their lives. Today, we have the privilege of talking with Christin Shatzer Roman. Christin has more than 2 decades of experience working with college students across multiple universities to equip them to serve their local communities. Christin has a doctorate of education and is particularly an expert in the intersection of faith and service for young adults. Welcome, Christin.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks, Falon. I'm excited to be here.
Definitely.
My full name is kind of a mouthful, so you did a very good job on pronunciation. Fabulous.
Thank you.
And I'm also a huge fan of podcasts, and now I'm in the podcast. So I'm so excited.
That is a very exciting switch up to be inside the podcast. I love it. So we want to get started with kind of like a big picture question, just when it comes to the overall Christian faith and how our faith relates to service. So what role does service play in our calling to follow Jesus?
So easy question, right? Very straightforward.
Right.
I'm sure I can do a soundbite in 30 seconds to answer this. How do we distill out our personal response to our Christian faith, and how do we walk that out on a daily basis? But in the work that I do, and just in my own conceiving of both deconstructing my faith and reconstructing my faith, and I think about service and how does it fit within this concept of living a Christian life, I see really service is one of the manifestations of how we respond to God's love and live out God's love in the world. I think about the life and ministry of Jesus and the communities that he found himself in, the people that he was among, the work that he was doing to see people for who they were. That, for me, really translates to service and showing up to aid your neighbor or respond when you see an opportunity to offer kindness to a stranger or respond to an immediate need of someone that you are proximate to. So I see it just as a natural extension of how do we manifest a response to God's love and extending it to others that we encounter.
I love that phrase, just a natural extension. I know you kind of said at the start, like a little bit tongue in cheek, like, oh yeah, let me distill that in 30 seconds. I mean, you did do a really good job. Like, let me just say that at the start.
Kind.
And
Thank you.
Funnily enough, as you were talking, I was like, yeah, love God, love neighbor. I guess we're talking about the love neighbor part, huh? Like I love that. That's such a beautiful way to describe, I think, a really big topic, right? And distilled into that.
Obviously, like you just said, love neighbor service is a really essential part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, and what that looks like maybe for different people, different ages, different stages, different personalities, different passions, different gifts, different skills will look different. But it's all of our shared calling. You have facilitated spaces in particular for college students to explore how to love neighbor through service during the college years. What do you think is unique about community service in the college years? And why do colleges even have options for students to kind of turn outward, away from the university, away from their life in college, and serve other people in the community?
So also very straightforward question, Falon. I think there's a lot of considerations around this question. So the first place that my mind goes to is about how formative service can be in the life of an individual. And what that has looked like as I've facilitated volunteer opportunities or mission trips or special service projects for young adults, whether they be high school age, college age, young professionals, whatever the age demographic is, my first reflection is just how formative the service experience can be. There's a number of reasons why that is the case, but we learn so much about ourselves when we are serving. We have an opportunity to reflect on our strengths and weaknesses, what we are good at, what we like, what makes us uncomfortable. And then have an opportunity, if there is someone in the space helping the volunteer reflect on their experience, to kind of think back on, why am I made uncomfortable by this encounter? So maybe I'm providing lunch to someone who's experiencing homelessness, and certain aspects of that experience made me uncomfortable, or perhaps I was a little hesitant or even had a sense of fear around an encounter. And an opportunity to serve is an opportunity to reflect on, how do I move through the world? What are my expectations in showing up in the world? What do I expect from the community around me? So service, I think, can be formative in that way. And it's really a part of the reason why I've chosen to do this work, especially in the context of higher education and looking at an educational setting as the facilitating mechanism by which young people get involved in service. And so one piece is around formation. I think there's also other literature out there on how service can be the antidote to loneliness and a sense of isolation. It can bolster resilience because we kind of get out of ourselves, we get out of our own heads. And so a great way to kind of have a mindset shift or even an attitude shift is to go look for an opportunity to be a blessing to someone else. And so service has also that component to it as well. Another element that I think is interesting, and it's a little bit more self-serving, is this question, and I think this question comes up a lot with emerging adults. I think it's a practical question, so I'm not necessarily judging the question. Other folks later on in life stages ask this question as well, but I find it comes up very often when I'm working with college students, and it's the question of, what's in it for me? And so under that question, for me, is kind of a sense of, we are all busy. How do I fit something else into my already tight schedule? Why would service be a priority there? And so oftentimes I'm finding myself having a conversation almost like selling the idea of service to young people and saying, like, here's what's in it for you. And I do that very genuinely and feel it. I'm so wanting the person on the other side of this conversation to really respond to this, because there is so much great benefit for the person who is doing the service from that experience. And so you have everything from professional exploration, developing your soft skills, making connections, networking, learning complex problem solving. All of these things can happen in service. They may not happen if you only serve or volunteer at one organization one single time. But if young people or other community members are looking to try to have a deeper impact, both contribute something to the community, but then also be formed and shaped by the experience, if you have a little bit more regularity to that same practice of volunteering, then you will, as a participant, get so much out of it, perhaps even more than you might be able to contribute. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because that is how we create healthy communities, that we enter into spaces, we work together, we try to understand a different context, a different group of people. That can happen through service in a really unique way. And so these are some of the things that kind of come to mind as you've asked that question.
Yeah, that's really good. I hear attention there. Like, we think about the pillars of emerging adulthood. Two of those are identity exploration and self-focusedness. And I'm hearing those kind of put in conversation with each other through service, where it's an opportunity to better understand oneself, to almost like turn inward and reflect and better understand oneself, explore one's identity, while also challenging that my identity is something individualized and that I can kind of figure out in isolation. It can only happen through experimentation and engagement with communities that maybe I wasn't familiar with before.
Yeah, I would say that's absolutely the case. Something that I've reflected on just over my years in my 30s, and now as I'm in my 40s, is this conceiving of, I can really understand my identity only in community with other people. So kind of seeing that kind of reflected back to me and communicated back to me. Now, it's not always the case that when someone's reflecting back to me my identity, that's the complete truth. But if I'm only thinking about my identity just within myself as a singular person, that probably is also not the complete story. So service invites a space for us to kind of all bump up against each other and kind of see what comes out in the mix. And I think there's a lot of beauty and discovery that comes out of that. And then I think there's also questions that come out of that we can wrestle with and say, why does homelessness exist in the world? Or why do we have folks that don't have access to essential items? Or why are there kindergartners in the United States who come to school hungry? So we can think about those questions and then consider them in the context of identity. Who am I? What do I care about? What do I bring into the world? And do I have anything to say about these challenges that I'm now encountering in a service experience?
Yeah. I want to also go back for a second to the piece that you talked about with like resilience and mental health, because really I feel like as you talked about all of these different ways that service shows up in the college experience and kind of is relevant to the college experience, it really was an all-encompassing like journey through, you're discovering who you are and you're making those professional connections and you're problem solving, all those things. We also know that there is a rise in anxiety, depression, loneliness is like an epidemic and really acutely on college campuses. I wonder if we can like dig into that for a second of how you've seen in your work and with college students that you've worked with, the ways that service has made a positive impact. Because I think a lot of adults, parents, pastors, professionals are all looking for inroads to try to combat this mental health crisis.
Yeah.
So certainly others would be more expert than I in kind of the nuance of that question. Sure. But from what I've encountered, so I have right now in my current role, one of the best parts about my job is that I get to manage a team of student leaders. So these student leaders on a college campus are really the ones that are identifying the service opportunities. They're developing the relationship with a nonprofit partner. They're helping to recruit their peers to be volunteers. And so what has been so enriching is to watch those students really develop in their leadership as they take ownership of doing this service work in the community. And where it kind of relates to your question, Rachel, is I see those students really thrive in that environment because first, they are finding like-minded community. So folks that are similarly passionate about the same things that get those young people really on fire and get them amped up. So they find that sense of shared community values. That's one really critical piece. The other piece is, as I alluded to just a moment ago, in how busy we are with our overly programmed schedules, we have so many choices on how do we spend our time, but oftentimes I hear students reflect that when they engage in service, they feel like I'm spending my time in a way that has meaning. It's not just I'm studying for this test, or I'm going to the gym, or I'm fill in the blank doing this thing, where it feels like the immediate benefit of that task is something you're going to see in the short term, where the idea of being involved in service is you're contributing to something that will ideally pull into a collective effort larger than the individual and will have some kind of impact, positive impact over time. And so also, I think in our generation of emerging adults is looking for that sense of meaningfulness and wanting to have something that has value beyond just the fleeting present. And engaging in service is one of those kind of durable things. Like your contribution can be something that is lasting. And so I think for students to kind of be grounded in all of the existential thinking and conversation that sometimes leads to elevated anxiety or might lead to loneliness, service can really provide the antidote for that, because you are hopefully seeing a bigger picture beyond just your own limited worldview and life experience. You're seeing that there's more out there. You're just seeing a range of experiences that are happening between, if you're volunteering with a nonprofit organization, the staff that are there, the clients that are there, the community where the organization is located. You're just able to see beyond your own lived experience. And in a lot of ways, that can be both really grounding, but then also really exciting and inviting to kind of look beyond just what you're dealing with now. And it can offer some perspective. And so I think service can almost mitigate, like if you're feeling low, it can buoy your spirits. And if you're kind of having a manic experience where you're out there and everything's high and we're excited all the time and really kind of caught up in our own internal world, then service can also ground us in a way to say like, okay, there's a lot of lived realities that are going on in our community, and we do well to be mindful of those. So we're not completely naive to both the beautiful things in our communities and the really challenging, sometimes ugly things in our communities.
I'm hearing you describe service almost like as a stabilizing experience.
I've found that to be the case in my life. So I am a little bit humored by the invitation to talk to you all today, because so much of this service experience is just like baked into who I am, where I'm like, I don't understand how to make the justification for this because it just makes sense to me. But to Falon, your point and question is, I have found service to be really grounding, whether that was when I was in youth group in my home church and doing a weekend mission trip and building homes with a community that was hundreds of miles away from where I grew up, and just having an opportunity to see hospitality demonstrated to me, to have an opportunity to see very humble circumstances not dictate how people relate to one another and not dictate a level of happiness and joy that is experienced. I've had other opportunities to volunteer in my high school years, when I was an undergraduate student, and then in various service opportunities, and saw there are so many ways to give, and there are so many needs out there. We are all uniquely gifted and equipped to respond. So really, I think the invitation is more to have eyes to see where the opportunities get presented in a person's path, and know that there is something unique that we can offer in those moments and unique that we can receive in those moments. And then a lot of times that is a helpful grounding experience or just perspective giving experience.
Yeah. I think college students are particularly, I don't want to say susceptible as if it's not true, but particularly have narratives of like, I'm really busy, I'm really short on cash, like I'm broke, the broke, busy college student stereotype. And service requires generosity of time, energy, and in some cases, resources, monetary or otherwise. What advice do you have for young adults and particularly college students who want to be generous with those resources, time and energy and money, but who feel a sense of scarcity?
So one of my mentors kind of helped me reframe this very phenomenon that you're describing, Falon. And so I heard this idea shared in like a conference or some professional setting where the remark was made, service is not what we do with our leftover time, because we don't have leftover time. Like even if we falsely believe that we're busy, everyone, I would argue, feels like they have limited time. And so if we only think of service as what we do with our leftover time, then the likelihood that we're going to really engage in something is pretty low. So to me, that brings to mind a couple of things. One is we typically prioritize the things that we think have value. So I would invite the first question is for folks that feel like that scarcity of time or resources of other sorts, if they feel scarce, kind of think for a moment first, why is that the case? Like, am I conducting the rhythms of my life in such a way that actually reflect my values? So I think that's a really great thought exercise for folks to engage in.
Yeah.
First, if the first instinct is this one of, I don't have enough of fill in the blank, so I can't do that. So one thought exercise there. The other piece is encouraging anyone to consider that service can be done in small ways and in ways that are incorporated already into your usual rhythms of life. what I typically like to do, especially if I'm working with college students around service, is I will figure out what are all of the different iterations that service can look like in a given week. So can I bring a service project to where college students are? Or can I take them to a service project, but I'm going to provide the transportation and maybe a meal?
Yeah.
Are there service projects that you can do remotely from wherever you are? Or do you have to be in person? Or are you already trying to work towards goal X, Y, and Z? Can service help you get there? So this idea that service looms large and it's this distinct thing outside of all of the other things that we choose to do with our schedule or our weekly calendar, service is something that can kind of fit within that. It doesn't have to be an addition. If it feels like an add-on, it's kind of hard for that to be kind of incorporated seamlessly. But an opportunity to figure out, okay, how can I already fit service into either the places I already am, the things that matter to me, or service as a stepping stone to help me get to my next goal. Mm-hmm. Embed it with things already happening, priorities, goals, and values that you have, and then see it be a part of a holistic life rather than a fragmented or kind of compartmentalized or divided up on the calendar life experience, looking for more kind of integration. And can it be something interwoven?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I really resonate with that interwovenness because I think when we talk about the spiritual practices or spiritual disciplines of the Christian faith, at least when I try to talk about that, particularly with college students, I try to use similar language of like, yeah, it's not like you have to go out into, the desert somewhere and like be in silence for a week. And if not, you're not holy or something. It's something that becomes part of your rhythms. And so because we see service as a spiritual discipline, I love that is the same language that you think about in your own practice and in your own experience with college students. You're right. That's how you get them. It's
if we reduce it to like grand gestures, it's never going to happen. And I would say that's true for a lot of spiritual practices.
Yeah.
Or it will happen far less often, as opposed to, I often use the language, kind of riffing off what you just said, Rachel, of, if we want to pray with every breath, that doesn't mean every word we speak has to be directed at God, but that we embody a way of walking in the world where God is a part of everything. Yeah. And so it's not that we do grand gestures of prayer or grand gestures of service or grand gestures of fill in the blank. It's integrating it into our daily lives.
Yeah, that's great. Christin, we've been talking a lot about like, what would you say to college students and how do you get college students on board? I'm wondering if we can shift our focus a little bit to parents and pastors. How would you advise parents, pastors, other people who care about emerging adults as they seek to connect with their young adults over these issues?
So what I'm mindful of in that question, Rachel, is I believe we're still very much in a time where, especially among emerging adults, so folks coming out of high school, into college, that age range, I believe we are still in an age where service feels like a checklist item. Mm-hmm. What I'm thinking of specifically is high schools that have a service graduation requirement.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a really interesting conversation about that idea of compulsory service. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's all bad. I think there's some downsides and I think there's some upsides. But it is interesting to have this conversation around what is a meaningful role of service in a person's life, especially as an emerging adult. One approach that I would encourage folks to take is how can you consider service and talk about service that moves us away from this idea of a checklist. Mm-hmm. So not talking to your student or your child about you got to get this 100 hours of volunteer work done or otherwise you won't be able to earn your diploma. Rather talking about how service can help us come alive in our passions, in seeing that there is a place for everyone in service. You don't really have to have a lot of credentials. You don't even necessarily have to have a lot of skills. a willingness to participate, a willingness to have an attitude of care and compassion is all that's really required. And so I think framing service as an invitation and an opportunity to become more fully oneself, because now you've tapped into a different way to contribute and a different way to offer something, I think is one consideration that can be made. So it's not transactional, it's not a checklist. It is more about manifesting the fruits of the Spirit and then also growing the fruits of the Spirit within yourself as you are going through service and having a place to meaningfully walk out those characteristics and attributes. The other thing that I think is also unique about young people engaging in service that they may not get in other spaces is there are so many chances for a young person to have agency and have a voice and to be someone influential in doing service. Thinking about the nonprofit sector here in the United States, so many organizations, in fact, I just met with staff at an organization here last week. What they are seeing is that their volunteer population is aging. And they are so hungry for young volunteers to come in, whether it's to help them be conversant in social media or just to have a fresh set of eyes and energy and creativity.
Yeah.
A young person walking into an organization to volunteer, now again, not necessarily just a one-time thing, but a young person who's interested in maybe a couple of times a month for a 6-month period, going to work with an organization on a volunteer basis, that organization is going to consider the young person an expert in their own perspective, worldview, and among their age demographic. And so I think another underutilized proposition to young people to volunteer is say, like, here is a place where you can have a lot of leadership and have a lot of input and influence just out of your lived experience, and come and share it with a nonprofit organization that's really hungry for a volunteer to come in at that age that wants to do more than just kind of check a box and be there. But really those organizations are hungry for this age demographic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. It sets the stage for how a parent, for example, can frame service in a completely different way. You gave me this like really strong memory when you talked about like high school requirements for service. I was like, oh yeah, I did some weird random hodgepodge volunteering in high school, you know, and not really from a place of formative, you know, transformation, but from a place of, I got to check this off. So yeah, that's a really helpful reframing. Thank you.
And I mean, realistically, like some of our experiences are going to be that. They are going to be box checking. It is, we're going to have to do this because we're required to or whatever. But I think looking outside of that and then really trying to, even if you are doing it to fulfill a requirement, figure out, okay, if I'm going to spend 100 hours of my time in this manner, what will give me the most return for that investment of time? And then really I would invite the young person or their parent or whoever is mentoring them in this process is to talk about what does it look like to bring your whole self to this volunteer opportunity, because you will get so much out of it and you'll be able to contribute so much.
I had a student once who was really, really passionate about homelessness and spent a lot of her time serving people in the unhoused community. And I asked her how that started, and it was from her parents modeling opportunities to serve communities that she otherwise wouldn't have been exposed to. So one of the examples she gave that particularly stood out to her was like every Thanksgiving, their rhythm was they went out and they participated in distributing food to people who were unhoused. And that was just one of their rhythms growing up. And she said she had done that, like her earliest memories of doing that from when she was like a preschooler. But there were other things too, other forms of service that her parents had kind of integrated. And a lot of them were those that she remembered and shared with me. I remember being more those grand gesture types, like that kind of rhythm on Thanksgiving. And the fact that like her parents participate in helping expose her to those kinds of opportunities, not all of them had to do with the unhoused community, but it gave her a chance to explore which justice issue, like which communities she wanted to participate in serving, which problems she wanted to participate in solving, which neighbors she wanted to like really focus on in loving. And I just really admired that approach of parents and mentors modeling the behavior, not just encouraging others to do it, but modeling it and doing it alongside as an integrated part of family life too. So that's something that's always stood out to me, and giving her an opportunity to discern which of those communities and questions she wanted to focus on, because not all of us are called to, I'm not called to solve every problem. That's why we're a part of the body of Christ, is because together we are called to steward the spaces that we have and the passions that we have. But yeah, that identity exploration in there and discerning what is most important to me so that I can love my neighbor well. I remember hearing a sermon once of like, let's stop talking about like which neighbors to love. Let's just like pick someone and love them. And that's always really stuck with me. And I think that service is a really big part of that. We don't have to solve every problem. It doesn't have to be overwhelming.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things at play there as I'm responding and reflecting on those remarks, Falon. One is I think we can get overwhelmed by like thinking we need to make a year-long commitment and we have to go once a week for a year. No, just try out a couple of things and see which fits, and then determine if you are in a position to make more of a commitment. You don't have to solve all of the problems. Like just focus on, as you walk through, maybe do an exam and practice of sorts in a given week. Just look to see, as you move through your daily routines, do I have open eyes to see a service opportunity that just crossing my path? Like I don't have to go far. I don't have to go outside of my neighborhood. I don't have to go outside of my town. I don't have to travel anywhere.
Don't even necessarily need to partner with a nonprofit.
Don't necessarily need to do that. There may be folks in my neighborhood that I could really be helpful to in a particular season of life. And so how can we be more realistic about what our expectations are in service? We don't have to make it be something that feels like it looms so large in our minds that then it becomes uninviting and unappetizing to do. So I think that's a piece, is just start somewhere. Don't overthink it. One thought that came to mind, Falon, in your comment too, is especially for families and folks that are anticipating a change in your family, if your student is moving from high school to college or is moving out of the home or is relocating, some really lovely ways to make family memories would be to serve together.
Yeah.
And so thinking about, even if it hasn't previously been, a part of something that your family does together is serve on a holiday or in those moments that maybe come top of mind that are a little bit more obvious to be engaged in the community. But maybe you can do a couple of things locally in your hometown if you're anticipating sending your child off to college or knowing that there's some kind of a transition upcoming in your family context. So I think that can be something really beautiful that families can do together. One other element that I will also add about service that I probably could have mentioned in an earlier question, but it's just coming to mind at this moment in our conversation, is service also is a little bit of an antidote to our immediacy culture, that we need answers at the snap of a finger. We need to see immediate results. We expect that things can happen for us in our lives quickly and without a lot of patience, or even without a lot of investment and care, that I expect things automatically to be better for myself, or I expect things to automatically happen, like good things to automatically happen in my life just because I wish them to, rather than an understanding that change for the better takes some time and commitment to forward progress. and that not all questions can be answered quickly. Not all problems have quick and easy solutions.
Yeah.
So there's very much in the world of our reliance on technology is that we expect an internet keyword search can give me all of the perfect answers to a question, or that because 2 weeks from now I want to be able to run a marathon doesn't mean that I'm going to not have to put in time, and realistically in 2 weeks I'm never running a marathon. Even in 2 years I'm not running a marathon. But this idea that, okay, if I have a goal or if I'm trying to achieve something, it's only 2 steps away and it won't be that hard. Typically not true. And so the idea of service taps into a tolerance for dealing with problems that don't have easy solutions, sitting in moments where we can't make a quick, easy fix, and also sitting in some discomfort that doesn't have a quick, easy resolution. So it builds our capacity to tolerate all of those things. And it adds to our grit that if we're willing to work through a problem, then we know it's going to be a longer time horizon for a solution to be achieved. But we're willing to do it as its own kind of discipline and personal development, skill building experience in and of itself. But building that capacity, especially among young people, unlocks so many doors for future potential just in a person's success, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's in a marriage, whether it's in a workplace, that we don't think that every challenge we encounter has an easy solution without us putting some skin in the game. All of the meaningful things in life do require commitment, work over time, us to give some sacrifice or give of ourselves. And so service is such a great proving ground to practice those things, where I don't always expect things to be happy, shiny, comfortable, easy, and resolved very nicely, wrapped up with a pretty bow on top. So I think that's another huge, huge takeaway for especially emerging adults to engage with service, because it is a snapshot into what other areas of meaningful life will look like and what they will require of you as you continue to grow.
That's so good. There is so much wisdom there. Thank you for that. And there's so much there that I want to like dig into deeper, but a couple of themes I'm noticing are 2 terms that we see thrown around in conversations about service, media consumption, justice, and that is compassion fatigue and the empathy deficit. Can you explain a little bit about what those are and how you see them come into play, especially in terms of service for emerging adults, young adults in college? And what do we do about them, compassion fatigue and the empathy deficit?
Well, if I had the solutions to those things, I would probably be independently wealthy. But I do think they are the questions to ask and the considerations to wrestle with. And so as I'm kind of interpreting these terms, think about compassion fatigue is there are so many humanitarian causes that we learn about, are bombarded with messaging about the plight of desperate people and communities around the world, and we need everyone to respond, or we expect folks to respond. And to do that consistently over time with feeling almost as if every few days or at least every week, there's a new global issue or crisis that's going on, or there's a local natural disaster or other kind of huge community event or global challenge or trauma that's taking place. And how do we care over time about those people? And I think especially when it is a cause that is not proximate in some way to you as an individual or your community, then it is really easy to have compassion fatigue because you don't have some kind of connection or link to the folks that are impacted. To think about how do you address compassion fatigue? I don't know. I would love to know the answer to that. But I do think there is some consideration to go back to ideas that we've already talked about in this conversation, which is look for what is right in front of you. Look for the opportunities that are presenting themselves to you right now. I'm thinking of growing up, watching television before DVR and actually having to watch commercials on cable television. Whoa. Really dating myself.
What?
And thinking about the Humane Society commercials with the dogs with the sad eyes. In the Sarah McLachlan, exactly.
Sarah McLachlan, if you'd like to sponsor us.
Yes. Absolutely. What is she even doing these days? Sarah McLachlan, reach out, DM us. So thinking about the Humane Society commercials and then also Compassion International and the images of children starving halfway across the world and only for a few cents a day can you sponsor a child. So these images are really locked in my mind as core memories from my childhood and feeling like, well, of course, anyone who doesn't care about these children and animals is just heartless. But also feeling like, well, I don't really know what to do with that. I'm 9 years old.
Right.
But then I think over time, and as we have more media that's kind of in our faces all the time, we are getting that messaging. And so I think really figure out, where do I actually have influence? Like, where can my contribution mean something? What do I uniquely feel passionate about? What helps me come alive? And then what am I proximate to? So I think if you can start there, then you're not looking at the whole world to save. You're just looking at what is within reach. I do think there's some fatigue and potential burnout, even if you're operating very locally.
Yeah, totally.
But start there. And as you're able to contribute, it's not as if when we serve or volunteer that we're just like shouting into the void. Like, you are receiving feedback. You are being filled by that exercise, by that process. And so if you are only seeing messages of need coming through the media that you're consuming and not actually physically out with people who are in the community living those experiences or serving in those contexts, I think it is really easy to get totally run down because the overwhelm just takes over.
Yeah.
But if you can operate in places where you know that your contribution will make a difference, even if it's a modest difference, that's great. Something is better than nothing all the time. And if it's proximate to you and if it's something that helps you come alive, I think that's really huge. And then in addition to compassion fatigue, we have the other phenomenon, which was
empathy deficit.
Yes, empathy deficit. This is such an interesting phenomenon. I don't know why it exists. It's kind of sad as far as I'm concerned, but it's also real that this is something that happens. And I think it comes from a couple of different places. One is this idea that surely someone somewhere will step up and respond to this need. So does it need to be me? Because I think, Falon and Rachel are great people. If they learn about this need, they're going to go and serve. So maybe I don't need to, right? Someone else is going to pick up the slack. Is it something I need to respond to? Maybe not. Where's the sense of urgency? I'm not sure it's for me. Also, I think around empathy is if I don't have some kind of tangible connection to a community of people or a particular cause, it is also really easy to say, like, that's not my problem to solve. And so I think, again, it's all about how are we doing more actual interacting with human beings so we can see what do these needs look like when they actually show up in community and not when they're a headline news story or they're not a fundraising solicitation. But also, again, I think back to a comment that I shared earlier is if you're looking to do what actually makes you come alive, then that I do think mitigates this gap of empathy or not having the capacity to remain empathetic to a neighbor who is hurting.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and I think obviously like we used to be bombarded with commercials. Now it's just social media. We know so much about so many things that it can be hard to not just get overwhelmed and have your brain declare emotional bankruptcy. So I have empathy for it, but I appreciate that perspective on how to shift away from it. So let's say a young adult or their parent or pastor is listening and they're like, all right, I'm sold. Let's do it. What would be the next step? Like, what advice would you have for a college student who like has just arrived to campus and is like, I really do want to find a place to serve. I don't know where to go. What does that typically look like on a college campus? And what's like, if you could give one little nugget, a little piece of advice for a college student for getting involved in service, what would you say?
So a couple of things. The first one is just because you don't know about a volunteer opportunity or haven't heard about anything doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. So I would say on your search to find meaningful ways to serve and contribute and volunteer in the community, go to what your usual source of getting information on any other topic is. So even something as basic as an internet search, or if you're on Reddit, go to Reddit. Mm-hmm. Go to do a keyword search online for the school or university that you're at and volunteering. Typically, colleges and universities are going to have some apparatus within the school that helps facilitate that experience for folks. You can search based on your zip code or even interest area online. Also, there's great resources that exist, different searchable databases. So Volunteer Match is one. The Points of Light Foundation is another. We work with local partners that have online searchable project calendars for volunteer opportunities. And so I would encourage you to look at those online resources. Find out if the missions or benevolence ministries that your church supports, do they have any local activity that's going on that you could partner with? If you know other community members at your church or within your neighborhood or other circles that you're a part of, and you know folks are involved and engaged in community or civic life, reach out to those folks as well, because they're likely a wealth of knowledge and resources and information. And then additionally, there's all kinds of civic organizations that have been around for decades that most young people know nothing about, but these organizations would be so excited to have young people be a part of them. And then also, they often offer scholarships to young people who have been involved in service or been involved in their work. These scholarships would go to college tuition. But it's groups like the Lions Club or Rotaract in your community. Typically, wherever you find yourself within 30 miles of where you live, there's probably going to be a Lions Club or a Rotary group. Rotaract is the college club version of Rotary. But if you're looking for civic organizations like that, they're going to be out in the community doing all kinds of community service efforts and would love for young people to be involved as well.
That's such a good pro tip.
That's so
I love
helpful,
ending with a pro tip. That's great. Christin, thank you so much for joining our podcast today. We loved getting to hear all about how this intersects with our faith, what it means to be a college student and seek out service, what to do if we just feel overwhelmed, and everything in between. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us and hanging out with us today.
Thank you both. It's been such a pleasure, and I'm in the podcast.
Thanks, Christin.